Okay, thank you everyone for joining us today. My name is Allie Carter. I'm the Director of Economic Development for the City of Lowell, and I'm very excited to have the folks from Prepshift here for our second workshop called What's on the Menu, Food Costing and Menu Design. So this workshop is being recorded. So if you know someone who wanted to participate today but wasn't available, definitely encourage them to reach out to us in the Economic Development Office, and we can send them a link to the meeting recording. We also have the opportunity for folks to work one-on-one with the team at Prepshift. I will drop the link for that application into the chat. During the meeting, if you have a question and you feel like typing it, you can put it in the chat function at the bottom of the screen. If you want to ask the question verbally, like I know some folks are participating by phone, you can raise your hand. And if you do chime in to speak, I would ask you to introduce yourself and the name of your business. We want it to be informal, comfortable, yet educational. So yeah, this should be a really fun conversation. And without any further ado, I am going to mute myself and turn it over to the folks from Prepshift who are truly the experts to take over. So thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Allie, and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Irene, and I'm going to be presenting today. And our topic is one of my favorites, which is about menu design and development, and all the ways that as restaurant owners, we have to be really intentional when we create our menus. So just to give everyone a little bit of background on who we are, Prepshift is a restaurant consultancy, and we work with independent restaurants and their teams to get everyone on the same page and build profitable and sustainable businesses. We are a team of three. I myself am a restaurant owner. My business started out as a food truck almost 12 years ago and has been through many iterations, catering, restaurant work, consumer packaged goods. And we're also joined by Dylan, one of my co-founders, who has a background in finance and gave last session's scintillating presentation on financial administration. And of course, we also have Carla here, my other co-founder, and Carla has worked in tech and people operations. Most recently, was part of the team at my business, May. And so we all come to this topic, I think most importantly, as people who really love going to restaurants and really love food. And also we want to make sure that the restaurants we love and the restaurants who are our clients are able to have menus that really support the success of the business. So today we're going to talk about all things menu and costing. And our goals for today are to make sure that all of you know how to make menu decisions based on your data, that you know how to cost your menu items, at least kind of to the most basic level. And then also, we want you to leave feeling empowered to improve your business by making changes to the menu. We want to ensure that your menu is profitable. So as you grow your business and grow your sales, you are not also growing your losses. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that in just a couple minutes. For our agenda today, we're going to go over a few kind of big picture questions about product and how you create a menu that fits your market. And then we're going to get a little bit more into the nitty-gritty of cost of goods sold, which we call COGS. Then we'll talk about how to take that information to analyze your menu and your sales. And then finally, we'll talk a little bit about tips for designing your menu, both figuratively and physically and literally. And so there'll be a lot of great takeaways there. Finally, we'll wrap up and make sure that all of you know how to do more work with Prepshift if we can support you with your menu analysis. and also have the chance to apply for more support for your business. So to kick things off, I want to invite everyone to share the name of their business in the chat. I think everyone should have that capability. So please feel free to drop that in there so that we know where you're coming from. All right. So before we dig in, we want to invite everybody to think a little bit about how you currently think about COGS, or cost of goods sold. Is this a topic that comes up a lot in your business? Is this something that you talk to your workers and your managers about? Is this something that's on your mind? Or maybe this acronym is totally new to you. And I see Melissa has her hand up. Feel free to chime in, Melissa.
Hi, okay.
Yep.
Chat is just disabled.
Oh no, okay.
Just wanted to
I'll
say
fix
that.
it. Thank you.
Thank you, that's all. Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much, Melissa. Yes, folks are welcome to think silently to themselves until we get chat enabled, or to just raise your hand and shout out. So how do you currently talk about COGS? Is this something that is part of everyday conversation in your business? And then we also are curious for folks to think about, how did you learn about cost of goods sold, or how were you trained? Some of us might come from longer careers in the restaurant business. Maybe we worked in a more corporate business where COGS was something that you talk about all the time. But on the other hand, you might be the owner of a kind of startup mom and pop restaurant, and perhaps you've been sort of learning the more technical or academic side of restaurant menus on your own. And regardless of how you learned or how you were trained, we're here to sort of get everybody up to speed, because there's so many things about creating a great restaurant menu that are not necessarily obvious, even to those of us who are really talented chefs and cooks. And one of the reasons that we ask these questions, and the reason that I'm really kind of passionate about this, is that menu costing and design can actually, of course, it can make your business more profitable, but in some cases, if your menu is not costed properly, the more you increase your sales, the faster you can lose money. As a business owner myself, I certainly have experienced feeling like, oh, wow, like we're doing more sales and that's great. The business must be really healthy. But if the menu is not designed for profitability, bringing more people into the business can lose money faster. And so we do want to keep that in mind as we move forward. And especially as the costs of different ingredients, proteins, and even packaging, as those costs increase, we want to stay on top of those and know that just because something was profitable 5 years ago doesn't necessarily mean that it's profitable today. So we'll start thinking about sort of the basics of menu evaluation. And the question that we want to put to you is, how do you currently evaluate your menu? When you look at it, how do you know if it's what you want it to be? Another way to think about this would be, what are some of the things you think of when you want to add items to your menu? So I'll just give everyone a moment to put something in the chat. And we really are just curious about how you're currently thinking about this. I think often for me, because I love to cook, I want everything on the menu to be stuff that I want to eat. And certainly when we were starting our business, that's what we thought a lot about. So we would invite people to share maybe a sentence about how you currently think about your menu, and how do you know if it's good or if it's where you want it to be.
And I'll chime in here, Allie, again. Oh my goodness. I'm going to fire myself from Zoom duty. The chat is enabled, so everyone can chat away now. Thanks.
Great. Okay, so someone said, Vidon said, ours changes seasonally and I like to keep it small. Wow, I love to hear that. Often we see menus that we think are much too long. So this is great to hear that that's one thing folks are thinking about. One other thing that I'm thinking about, because I know that Sahiana is here from Mill City Barbecue. One thing we talk about sometimes is like, what do your customers expect based on the concept of your restaurant? So if you were to go to a barbecue restaurant and it didn't have any of the sort of classic barbecue items that people think about, that might be a challenge to explain to your guests. So we also think about sort of customer expectations and what they might be expecting when they come to your doors. So let's move to talk about some of the common criteria. The first one is concept. So like we were just talking about, how do we present a sort of coherent and an easy to grasp set of menu items to our customers? And oh, Denise said, our menu is huge. I would like to make it smaller, but in Lowell, it's hard because all the Cambodian restaurants have a huge menu, so there's competition. That is a really, really good point, Denise. Thank you for sharing that. And Christiane said, we think about what is really traditional in Brazil and hard to make at home, so people will look for the item in a restaurant. That is also awesome. And so that also falls into this next criteria, which is about the market. And we're talking about your sort of broader community and what sells and at what price. Of course, the market could also dictate customer expectations, like Denise said. Oh, all the Cambodian restaurants have a huge menu. And so knowing your competition is also part of judging the effectiveness of your menu. And then one other criteria we think about sometimes is the implications for operations in your business. So Denise can probably speak to how it can be hard to have a really large menu because you have to get the food out fast, you need to have all of your ingredients ready to go, and you also have to balance things across the different stations in the kitchen and have enough people to prepare all of the food. So that's one other element. And I'm curious to see if anyone thinks that there is something missing from this list. This is our list of how we evaluate our own menus. And I won't make you say it, Dylan, but I know you're thinking it, which is that we need to know how these menu items impact the financials of the business. So we talk about costing menu items, which is basically, there you go, Michael, price, exactly. So we talk about costing, which is sort of our shorthand for calculating the cost of your restaurant dishes. And that costing information can help you answer a lot of different financial questions. So these include things like, is my COGS percentage healthy? Have I priced my menu items correctly? Is my menu mix balanced? And does my menu allow me to be profitable? In my experience, number two, is my item priced correctly, is a pretty popular question. And it relates to all of these other questions too. So if you're thinking about these questions as it pertains to your own menu, and maybe you're not sure if your COGS percentage is healthy or if you have a balanced menu mix, but we're going to talk about all of these in more detail and talk about some of these words and phrases that we're using here as well. So the next piece of what we'll talk about is, what is COGS? So as Carla put in the chat, COGS stands for cost of goods sold. If anyone wants to take a stab at what this means or what it might include, please feel free to do so in the chat. So cost of goods sold, we typically think of as all of the expenses directly associated with the ingredients and packaging that go into what you sell. So it's what you spend on your ingredients and the packaging that goes with it. And I see some notes in the chat. Thank you all. I moved on too fast, clearly. But the reason that we want to calculate cost of goods is that it helps us determine what we should sell a dish for. And we think about cost of goods in both dollars and percentages. One of the things that I want to highlight here is that in restaurant businesses, when we talk about cost of goods sold, usually we're talking about the ingredients and the packaging, but not the labor. In some other industries, labor is included in cost of goods sold, but because labor is so expensive in restaurants, we often track it differently. And so, Vidong, you said everything that it costs to deliver the product. And in the case of restaurants, we're thinking about all of the ingredients and packaging, but not necessarily the labor. So, in terms of pricing our menu items based on our COGS, if we sell a $10 sandwich, how much do you think you should spend on the ingredients? And we have a couple options here, but you could also put a different number in the chat. What should the cost of our ingredients be in our $10 sandwich? Thank you. Vidang says 150. Sahiana says $3. I'll take one more guess before we move on. And my apologies to our guest who's on the phone right now. Okay, Timothy says 5. All right. So let's take a look at the breakdown of benchmarks for food businesses. And when I say benchmark, just to clarify, a benchmark is sort of how we think about an industry standard. And as you can see here, we think the benchmark for COGS should typically be around 25%. So this pie, this whole circle, this is the $10 that we charge for the sandwich. And these slices of the pie represent what we spend that revenue on. So for a financially healthy restaurant business, we think COGS should really be between, let's say, 20 and 35% of revenue. And in our $10 sandwich example, this would mean spending $2, maybe $3 on ingredients. And so we have a couple of answers that are right in that frame. And one other thing that we want to note is that the reason the COGS benchmark has a range to it is because labor and COGS, when we add these together, we call them primes. And these two numbers have a special relationship. They have an inverse relationship, which means that when one of them goes up, the other one usually goes down. So we often combine these two numbers and say that COGS and direct labor should come to about 60% or not exceed 60%. But generally speaking, we would think that COGS within the sort of 20 to 30% range is a healthy starting point. And there are always opportunities to improve on COGS as we look closer at the business's operations and the sort of specific instances. But as far as a benchmark for across the industry goes, this is the number that we typically think about.
Irene, if I could just add, I think that it's important to note that the example we gave was talking about a $10 sandwich. So for an individual menu item, there might be very good reason for the COGS percentage to be pretty low or pretty high. And so it depends per menu item. When we're talking about the benchmarks, generally we're zooming out a little bit and saying, like, across all of your ingredients, your entire menu averages something like 25, it doesn't mean every single item needs to be at that, just that altogether they come out to be something like 25, and more importantly, that your prime costs come out to something like 60.
Awesome. That's a great point, Dylan. Thank you. Okay. So we're going to spend a little bit of time talking big picture about how we actually calculate COGS. And of course, you can look at your profit and loss statement and see what the overall cost of goods for your business is. But it's really valuable to calculate the cost of goods on individual menu items. That can tell you a lot about the health of your business. So to calculate COGS, we have to first measure out each component that we put into the dish and then determine how much it costs. So we are going to, as an example, calculate the cost of goods of these pork belly noodles. So we have to find our list of ingredients, and you can see here, we've got some pork belly, some noodles, a bunch of different sauces, some veggies, and our packaging. And when we are trying to figure out what each of these things costs, some of the ingredients have a very straightforward price, and others are going to require that we do a little bit of math. So, for example, you can see here that the noodles are already portioned. And so it's going to be pretty easy to figure out what a portion costs here. But if you look at this pork belly, for example, this is not how, if we buy it by the pound, this is not necessarily how we sell it to the customer. So we'll need to look at how we prepare it and then do some math to help us determine what the portion cost is. Whoops. Another thing that can get complicated is that we prepare the food and we cook it. And so sometimes the quantity of ingredients that we buy is not the same as the quantity that we ultimately serve to people. So let's say maybe you buy 5 pounds of Brussels sprouts, but you're not going to actually end up serving all 5 pounds of those. So when ingredients go from unprepped to prepped or from raw to cooked, there will be some loss. And for example, let me get to this next slide first. So we have to account for the loss or the waste, and then we have to figure out what the yield is. Yield essentially refers to how much finished or processed product is left once we go through the prep. So here's an example. Let's assume that raw pork belly costs $6 a pound. And when we roast the pork belly, we cover it in salt and brown sugar, and we turn the oven up really high and we get it nice and caramelized, and I'm making myself hungry. And when we roast it, 1 pound actually becomes half a pound. Some of the water evaporates, some of the fat renders out, and that means that our yield is going to be 50%. And it also means that 1 pound of cooked pork effectively costs $12 a pound. And that is a big difference between 12 and 6. And so when we're thinking about the cost of our final dish, we want to be thinking about how much cooked pork we ultimately put into it. So this is an example table with the full cost of goods of our pork belly noodles. And when we measure how much pork belly goes into each dish, we're talking about cooked pork belly. And so we've set the price at $12 accordingly. Keep in mind, we also include the cost of the takeout container, especially during COVID. This became a really important piece of cost of goods. And you can see our other ingredients here, how many grams of Brussels sprouts, how many ounces of peanuts and scallions. So this chart looks pretty simple overall, but it takes a lot of work, right, to do all of this measurement, to convert the units into the same units you use when you're cooking, and then to add up all of the math. And so we'll talk more and also can support folks with technical assistance for going through some of this process. And I want to make sure we emphasize that We are not expecting or asking you to cost out every single item on your menu. That would be great, but it is not necessarily very realistic. And so we know that your time is limited and really valuable. And so what we recommend is pulling a sales mix report from your point of sale and organizing it by the most items sold. And a good start for costing would be to cost the protein and the main ingredients of your top 5 menu items. So maybe you can leave out the little scallions that you sprinkle on top, or the peanuts that you serve on the side. Even better than that would be costing the full recipe of your top 10 menu items. And then as you continue to get this costing down, cost the full recipe of the top half of your menu. And we know this can be daunting, and so we want to emphasize going one step at a time and focusing on your most popular items and the most expensive ingredients in those items is the best way to help you develop actionable data as fast as possible. And so for some of our clients, they might cost one menu item per week and look to the whole team to help gather information about what units we should use, how many grams or ounces of a certain ingredient we used. And that can be a lot easier than trying to, pull your chef in for a day and do a full day of costing. We also wanted to just mention batch recipes. So in, high volume restaurants, many products we cook in big batches, and then we serve a portion of that batch when the customer orders it. So costing a batch recipe is similar to costing an individual portion. We just have to divide it by how many portions we get. So let's say we know that the COGS for a batch of noodles is $20 and we made 10 portions. We know then that the cost of goods per portion is $2, and that seems pretty easy. One thing to keep in mind is that controlling portions and making sure you get all 10 of them is really important to ensuring that a dish is profitable. So for example, if you think you're going to get 10 portions, but maybe you have a cook who is very customer oriented, who wants to be really generous, and they're giving a little bit extra to each customer, maybe they only get 8 portions. And then your actual cost of goods is $2.50, not $2. So even though you went to the work of calculating the cost of goods, when you're portioning it, you might be giving away more than you actually calculated. And I see that Vidong mentioned catering prices. And yes, catering is one place where batching is really useful from an operations perspective. And making sure that everything is portioned correctly for a catering is super important too. The more we sell and the higher volume we have, like imagine during the lunch rush, the easier it is to not portion really carefully. And so the work comes down not just to doing the math to get your cost of goods, but to verify that what you're giving the customer is actually what you've intended when you've designed the recipe. So we've determined the cost of goods of an individual portion, and now we have to think about how we determine if that dish is actually going to be profitable. So we think a lot about the COGS percentage, and we're going to calculate that next. So depending on whether or not you are a math person, and I am not, which is why I'm presenting this week, you may or may not feel very comfortable with percentages. So just a reminder for everyone, when we're talking about percentages, we're really just comparing the part to the whole. And so the dish cost of goods, that's the part that we're thinking about. And then the price that you put on the menu, that's the whole that we're going to be comparing it to. So we know that our pork belly noodles with the takeout container costs $3.75. And let's say we're going to put them on the menu for $15. When we do this math, we get 0.25, which is equal to 25%. So what we would say is that the cost of goods percentage for a takeout order of pork belly noodles is 25%. Going back to the benchmarks we were thinking about, and kind of another way of thinking about this is that an item's menu price should be 3 to 5 times the cost of goods sold, which is the equivalent of 20 or 35%. And I will say, I think, maybe 10 years ago, saying 3 times COGS would have been more adequate. These days, because labor is so expensive, many of our clients are trying to come a lot closer to 5 times COGS, so 20% cost of goods. So one question that we want everyone to think about is, are high COGS menu items bad for your menu? And we think that that depends. So we're going to talk a little bit about a concept called contribution. And I know that we're using a lot of words that either you're not familiar with or you don't use every day. And so we're really trying to spell out what all of these concepts are. And I'm also happy to go back over everything as we move forward. So thinking about contribution, this is also sometimes called contribution margin. This is the dollars that are left over after you've paid for the cost of goods sold. So we started at dollars, we went to percentages, and now we're going back to dollars again. And another shorthand for saying this is contribution equals menu price minus cost of goods sold. So here is an example for us, or actually 2 examples. So we've got 2 dishes here. One of them is a steak and one of them is a chicken dish. And you can see here that the cost for the steak, maybe this is like filet mignon and it's a really nice grass-fed cut. This dish, the COGS is $15. And down here we can see, the chicken only costs $4 to make. So how are we going to price these items? Again, you can see that the steak commands a $35 price. So this is probably one of the more expensive items on the menu. The chicken, by contrast, we've priced at $16. And so when we do our COGS calculations, we're comparing the part. So for example, 15 over the whole, which is 35, and we get 42%. For the chicken, 4 over 16 is 25%. So when we look at these 2 items, if we only look at COGS, we might say, oh my gosh, this steak is way too expensive. We want our benchmark to be 20%, and it's all the way up at 42. But we also have to look at the dollars that we bring in each time we sell this dish. So to get our contribution, we take 35 and we subtract 15 for a contribution of $20. And by the same token, we take $16 and subtract 4 for a contribution of $12. So every time we sell a steak, even though the COGS were 42%, we take $20 to the bank. And with the chicken, every time we sell one, we make $12. So taking both COGS and contribution into account, which dish would you want to sell more of in your restaurant? Okay, Vidong says chicken. What does everyone else think? Oh boy, we have a lot of opinions here. Great. Michael Kitt says dumplings. I love it. Michael might be pandering if he knows what my bread and butter is. Okay, so the truth is there is not necessarily a correct answer to this question. Egg rolls, wow, I'm so hungry now. Okay, we have a lot of different ways to think about this. But as my esteemed colleague Dylan often says, with COGS, you don't take percentage points to the bank. It's about the dollars that you bring in. And so when customers purchase a high contribution menu item, you're bringing more cash to the bank. When we think about improving contribution, we can increase the menu price or reduce our cost of goods in order to maximize those dollars. So, wow, if great contribution is so important, should we all just be selling steak and expensive wine or steak egg rolls, maybe? The answer is it depends. Like Dylan said in the beginning, it's not about the COGS or contribution of any single menu item. Instead, it's about having a balanced menu mix that helps you achieve whatever your COGS targets are. So, our next question is going to be, how do we actually evaluate a new or existing menu based on the information that we have? This is going to bring us to the star dog analysis. I'm curious if anyone here has ever heard of this or done a star dog analysis with their menu. When this tool was taught to me, I'll share, I ran my business for many years with my brother and sister, and we often argued about individual menu items. Because maybe this one is somebody's favorite, or this one is, something that someone created, and so we're attached to it. And obviously, you don't want to fight with family, but if that steak egg roll dish is really precious to you, you're going to fight for it. And so doing star dog analysis actually helped us not argue as much about the menu and to really look at the data to understand how different menu items were impacting what we were doing when we made menu edits. And I think Christiane said it back in the chat that we try not to price things too high. We are so uncomfortable pricing the food. And I very much relate to that. And so I think this is one way that we can think about getting more comfortable as we move forward. So what is a star dog analysis? Star dog is based on this chart, which we have two axes for: the contribution of dollars and the sales volume. And star dog is a tool that we use to compare different menu items to one another. It helps us identify our strongest and our weakest menu items based not just on how much you sell, but also on how much cash they bring in for you. And it also thereby helps us decide which menu items we want to promote or discontinue, or maybe rework or retool. And so to create a star dog chart, we need two pieces of information. We need to know the contribution of each menu item, which is the dollars brought in. And we need to know the sales volume, or how many we sold in a given period of time. And once we chart those items, we end up with these 4 quadrants. So in the upper left quadrant, these are items that we call question marks. They have low sales, but high contribution. So we don't really make that many of them, but every time we sell them, we're bringing a lot of money to the bank. This in particular could be something like a very high-priced steak. So maybe at a steakhouse, a lot of things are in the 40s and 50s and 60s, but there's a double cut 90-day dry aged prime rib that's $180. And when people look at that menu item, most of us are like, but of course, there are always going to be some people who want to buy the fanciest item on the menu. So maybe you're not selling very many of those very fancy steaks, But anytime you do, you're probably bringing in a lot of cash, even after you've paid the price of the cost of goods. Now, up here in the rightmost quadrant, we have stars. So stars have high sales and high contribution. These are really the items that we want to keep selling because we know that they make our guests happy and we know that they make great money for the business. Workhorses are down in this quadrant. These are items that have high sales, but low contribution. Often these are items that are not considered particularly high value, but everybody wants them. So this might be something like a side of fries or chips and salsa. They're not going to be priced high enough to make a lot of money, but we know that lots of folks are going to order them. And Vidang said our wings. And Vidang, can you clarify, are the wings a workhorse in your opinion? Yes, okay. So we're selling a lot of wings, and maybe because of the price of wings, maybe because of the perceived value, we're not able to make a ton of contribution on them. So that's something that's really good to know. And then finally, in the last quadrant here are our dogs. And in every other scenario, we love dogs and we think they're the best. But in the case of the star dog chart, the dogs are unfortunately not our winners. They have low sales and low contribution. So not only are they not bringing in that much money, but people don't really order them. So one thing that I would encourage everyone to do is to think about, even if you haven't costed your menu yet, you probably have some idea of what items on your menu might be a total star, and maybe what is a workhorse or a question mark. So I'll give everyone a moment to just kind of mull that over and would love to hear some examples in the chat. Thank you, Vidhan. So the chicken and waffle sandwich. Do we think that that is a star? I don't know. Kind of sounds like a star to me. Star in my book. It's a dog. Oh no. Okay. So we're not selling very many of them, and we're not getting a lot of contribution out of them. Very interesting. Carlin, Dylan, I also, if you have any examples of stars or dogs, feel free to chime in as well.
Yeah, Vidang, I'm curious. I guess I'm not entirely surprised to hear you say, or to hear that it's a low contribution item, the chicken and waffles. But I'm surprised that it's low sales volume. I'm curious if you have an idea of why. I mean, those two items themselves are sort of universally popular. I think are very popular, and together, why not? Yeah, curious what you think it is. Is it the price point? Is it, is there a condiment on it or something that's throwing people off? What's going on?
I just gave you the ability to talk if you want to just answer verbally.
Okay, and Sahiana says, our smoked rib dinner is a star, and our smoked sausage dinner would be a dog, if not a horse. Very interesting. So we think that the smoked rib dinner brings in a lot of dollars in contribution and also sells a lot. And then for the smoked sausage, I wonder, Sahiana, does the sausage sell more or less than the ribs? The sausage sells less. Okay. And is the sausage cheaper than the ribs? I imagine it would be, but I'll let you tell me. It is by about $4. Okay. So I think that the sausage is probably oh great, lots of other feedback. The sausage is probably a horse or a dog, like you said, and all of that would depend on the exact numbers in terms of the contribution and the sales volume. So you are right on the money there. And Denise says, our amok dish is our dog and our hot wings is the horse. Okay. Man, I really wish we could spend a lot more time on everybody's menu. I'm so curious. And one thing that I'll say is that often as operators, we sort of know sales volume, right? It's pretty easy to be in your restaurant day to day and know, X dish sells a lot faster than Y dish. But sometimes, in my experience, the contribution can be really surprising. And so that's why doing this cost of goods work is so important. Because the contribution is the difference between a star and a workhorse. The sales volume, maybe we already know kind of which side of this dividing line we're on, but the contribution is not always totally intuitive. So taking a step back, when we think about profitability, our goal is to make sure that our most popular, best-selling menu items are also high contributors to net operating profit. And this goes back to the problem that we see often. Sometimes your best-selling dishes, especially if they have expensive ingredients, they can be what puts you out of business if they're not priced appropriately. I think one great example is kind of really protein forward dishes that are priced very competitively. So for example, I feel like lamb curries or sometimes a dish with oxtail, the operator wants to sell it at roughly the same price as the other proteins that are available. But the reality is that the protein costs a lot more. And so sometimes those dishes, they sell like a star, but they have the contribution of a dog or a workhorse. And so we want to see how we can turn those dogs and workhorses into stars so that the items that you sell the most are bringing in the most cash. Any questions about that?
So can you hear me?
Yes, hi.
Hi. So my menu right now, I would say about 80% of our menu we use like one protein, but that's divided into like 6-7 dishes. So that's where my high volume is too,
Yeah.
Then I got a few dishes that kind of like offset it, but not a lot of people order. But once they order, it's not as the cost of the goods is a little bit higher, but it all average out because my higher ones outsell it like 5-1, basically.
Yeah, that is a great point. And that's why looking at the menu mix is so important. And Vidong, after we met last time in Lowell, we went online and looked at your menu, and I am so excited to learn more about it by tasting it, of course, and also looking into more of this. So hopefully you're finding this valuable so far, and there'll be opportunity for us to dig in some more and to see how those menu items are kind of interplaying with each other.
Yeah, that's one thing about my menu is like, it's priced at the point, but the upsell a lot more. Like for example, like the add-on, it's an easy add-on. So our average item is like You know, instead of being 15, it's like 22, 20, sometimes 24 bucks for an order, you know.
I am so glad you mentioned add-ons because that is coming up next in our presentation. Awesome. Please feel free to add anything else too.
Sure.
So let's just talk briefly and go over again how we actually perform a star dog analysis. So we have to calculate the cost of goods, and usually we go one menu category at a time. So for example, you could do all of your entrees or all of your cocktails, but it's not necessarily fair to make chips and salsa compete with really nice French wine. And so we try to keep like items together. Then we take the menu price, subtract the COGS, and determine the contribution. We plot the items along the sales volume x-axis and the contribution y-axis, and then we evaluate our findings. And I do have to say, this was one of my favorite activities as a business owner. Again, because it allows you to see the data in a way that makes people's opinions or maybe their preferences or favoritism for a certain dish a little bit less important. And of course, you know, as business owners, the way we feel about things does matter, but we also have to have the data on our side in order to make smart decisions. So we have an example of a star dog analysis for some sandwiches from a fictional restaurant. Any resemblance to my own restaurant is purely coincidental. And what you can see here is that we've got 2 stars, 2 question marks, 2 dogs, and 1 workhorse. And so we would love to have some more stars on this chart. And so the question that we'll put to everyone is, how do we improve dishes that aren't stars?
And I think it is probably worth, and you'll probably touch on it again, but it's probably worth mentioning at this point that the way that the exercise works is that you're plotting everything relative to one another. So if you improve the sales and improve the contribution of all items, it sort of moves the goalpost. You can't get everything to be a star. Something is always going to have less contribution and less sales than another item. And so it sort of moves the goalposts. But so you can improve items and you can move individual items up to be a star, but not every item can be a star. That just not the way the tool works. And I also think that it's worth mentioning that I am often labeled the soulless financial opinion in the room. And while that is true sometimes, I think that it's important to give yourself, one item. So every item should have its own, every item should have its place on the menu. There should be a purpose for every item. And this is a great way to talk through it, with yourself, with your business partner, with your chef, to make sure that every item is serving a purpose. But you're running the company, it's your operation, like you should be able to have fun too. So I usually say it's like, you get one item that is like a total dog or whatever it is. Nobody likes it but you. That's okay. It's your business. Have some fun. But the fun ends at 1. So make sure you pick a really good one. And you could always cycle it out. Like there are options. So you get one pet item, and then the rest of it, we'd encourage you to think about, like, it's not what I want. It's not what you want. It's what does the business need? And that's a great way to approach those exercises.
That's great. Thank you, Dylan.
So for me, like my dog one, what I do is I move it to offer as like a daily special. So on my weekly, like certain dishes feature for that day, because those dishes that we like, and we know that's not high volume, but us featuring on that day, we actually sell a lot more because of a scarcity,
I love it. That's great. And Denise also mentioned something similar, which is do a promotion on an item so it can be a star. So when you direct customer attention and emotions, maybe sense of scarcity towards a menu item that needs a little more love, that can change how the numbers work out. So we're going to go category by category and talk in a little bit more detail about how we create more stars. So for our question marks, just again, keep in mind, these are high contribution items that don't sell that well. So like Denise and Vidang said, promote this item, give it a prominent menu position. Can we make it more popular? Can we put a big circle around it, or say, you know, it's a chef favorite? I love, like, in Chinese restaurants where there are like a million menu items, but it says like chef special next to some of them. You know, that's one strategy for trying to draw people's attention. Another strategy here is improving the item description and sort of the marketing of it. Can you give it a name that is more interesting, or that sounds more appealing in some way? And then finally, sometimes there are ingredients that kind of put people off of a certain dish. The kinds of ingredients that might be polarizing. And so I'm wondering if anyone, Dylan, has an example of that.
Yes. So I guess in terms of the question marks, if you've got a Caesar salad, describing it as a Caesar salad, you might sell 100. If you list the ingredients of the homemade Caesar salad, because you want to brag that you're making it yourself, as you should, and you list anchovies as an ingredient, a lot of people, maybe they don't pay attention, maybe they don't even know that Caesar salad, when it's homemade, often has anchovies in it, and they think they don't like anchovies, but they like Caesar salad. And so all of a sudden it's going to sell less just because, you know, people are convincing themselves they're not going to like it. So that would be one way that being descriptive could actually like backfire, and you think you're doing a good thing by bragging in ways that you generally should, but being very careful about those polarizing ingredients, as Irene mentioned. And I've got another example that I think Irene is eagerly anticipating when we get to the workhorses. I promise I will deliver.
Okay, excellent. And then, of course, we have our dogs. So these do not bring us a lot of contribution, and they don't sell all that well. Our options here are really to either rework the recipe, or potentially to remove the dish altogether. Now, like Dylan said, this analysis is relative. So even if we improve all these dishes, there might still be dogs. And often, in my experience, dogs might be items that are a specific formulation, for example, to accommodate like a dietary restriction. So if you have a barbecue restaurant, maybe you have one vegan dish, it's never going to outpace the smoked rib or the smoked sausage, but it's still important for you to have it on the menu. And so you might say it's okay for this item to be a dog. It's part of the balance on our menu. Anything to add?
One thing I'll share. Yes. One thing I'll share for dogs is, even if you are making the right decision because this dish is costing you money and it's not really selling, I guarantee you your customers will complain. There is no change that you can ever make to a menu where a customer will not complain. We had a client that insisted on selling breakfast. They were open from like 8 a.m. to 9 p.m. and it was getting to be unmanageable. Their COGS were way, way too high. But so we were like, okay, let's just look at the data. And she was convinced, I need to be open for breakfast. People love my breakfast. When we looked at her annual sales for her breakfast dishes, they actually were only selling a couple $100 per month. I think it amounted to like less than 2% of her total annual sales. And she could have gotten so much more time with her kids, time for herself back. And when she took those menu items off, immediately, several customers complained, I loved your breakfast. Where did it go? Well, clearly they didn't love it enough to buy it. And so that's the ultimate reminder. Customers will say a lot of things. They'll complain about things being on the menu or not being on the menu. But the one thing you can absolutely trust is, are they buying it? What does the sales data say about, are they putting true action behind their words?
Yeah, that's a great point, Carla. And I think, and Denise says 100% agreed. I love that. And I think this speaks to Christiane's point again, that it can be very uncomfortable to change prices or to change menus because we get this feedback. And sometimes, you know, one very cranky customer, even though they're one person, that can, in our minds, it can really be it can be blown out of proportion. Like, I'm gonna upset Susan. It doesn't matter what the data says, Susan's pissed. And so I think we definitely have to be careful about that because, I mean, again, like, we're in hospitality, right? So it's our job to empathize with and advocate for the customer, but we have to do that in balance with what is right for the business. Christiane also gave a shout out to chicken gizzards. When you explain what part of the chicken the gizzard is, they don't sell as well. That's a great example. I certainly myself am a fan of gizzards, but can understand that that is not the case for everyone. So let's move on to workhorses. How we create more stars from workhorses. One thing you can do is kind of bundle a workhorse item with a star. So Vidam's point earlier, create an add-on. That can be a great way to improve the sales volume of an item that doesn't have great COGS. And then, of course, we can improve the item's contribution by reducing COGS or increasing prices. And I think Dylan has an example of that.
Yes. So I think in general, workhorses are items to treat with a lot of care, and to be very intentional about changes you're making. You know, it's a very popular item. Tons of your guests love it. You've probably got guests that come in and get it every single time they come. So you know, if it's being exposed to a lot of guests, it ought to be safeguarded. So one of the best ways to improve a workhorse is by understanding why people are purchasing it. So the example that Irene was referring to was this dish that was very popular, second most popular item on kind of like a fast casual business's menu, but it was a workhorse, and the contribution just wasn't great. And so they found out basically that one of the ingredients was edamame, and it cost something like 34 cents per portion that went into the dish. And they realized that nobody really cared about edamame. They weren't purchasing it because of that. They were buying it because of the other ingredients that were in it. So they swapped the edamame at 34 cents out for shredded carrots at 4 cents. So they saved 30 cents every time. That additional contribution, you know, is a fairly low price menu in general. So that 30 cents is a big deal when you're selling, you know, 10,000 of them in a year or something like that. So that was enough to bump it up to a star without impacting the sales at all and without jeopardizing the guest experience at all.
So for me, what I did to kind of showcase some of the dishes, I took away some of the familiar dishes that a lot of customers don't understand about the menu. Like, for example, like I took away orange chicken and Mongolian beef. At one time, I took out pad thai because those are the items that people are familiar with. So kind of force them to or look at other item on the menu.
And what sort of feedback or, you know, experience did you have doing that?
For the most part, they actually don't mind. They're actually open to order other things, which that was our intent to you know, to do anyway.
Got it. Yeah, and I think that's a great example. Like the specifics are very interesting, but also like you did a very bold thing by, you know, taking items away and changing the menu. And you probably had some vocal guests that you know, cried about it, but you know, you learned a ton and the world didn't come crashing down. I think that applies to like pricing too. It's like it's so scary to make changes to the menu. You don't want to upset people, and even big changes like people adapt to. And so hopefully you can take that and apply it in other cases where, you know, it might be scary to take a leap doing something, but in reality, like the results are never as scary as most folks think. So thank you for sharing.
You're welcome.
Yeah, I love that. Vidang is not afraid of Susan, fictional Susan, who I'm scared of. So I think one other note I wanted to say about workhorses, if we're thinking kind of along like the chips and salsa line, sometimes it's also okay not to mess with these dishes because they're probably helping people order more other high margin food. So maybe, you know, chips and salsa is a great way to sell a cocktail, or people are upselling themselves on something else. So again, just because something is not a star doesn't mean you have to change it. But we think that this is a helpful framework. And again, also, you know, you might be able to incrementally move an item closer to stardom, but it might still be in the quadrant that defines it as a workhorse. And one other thing that we want to keep in mind is that you can even improve the performance of stars. It's going to make it harder for the other menu items to catch up, but we generally think that's okay. To increase the sales of stars, we can market and promote them. We can increase the prices if we feel it is responsible to do so. And we can also give them a really prominent position on the menu. And one of the things that I think is really valuable is thinking about how you might train your staff based on this kind of information. So if the staff know that they should be really marketing and promoting stars and question marks, if somebody gets a workhorse, they should upsell them on something else. These are all great strategies to give your team so that when somebody asks like, oh, like what's good here? Or what's your favorite dish? The staff know that they can guide them towards a choice that is both going to make the guest happy, but also generate healthy contribution for the business. So the main takeaway here, as we've talked about already, is that we want to pay attention to customer feedback and behavior as it's reflected in the sales data. And you might have a few customers that love a dish, or maybe you or your chef really love a dish, but if it doesn't really sell otherwise, it might be time to reevaluate that item. And as we said before, there are some reasons to keep a dish that doesn't sell. It might be to accommodate an allergen or a dietary restriction. And that's a situation where I think we can feel comfortable settling for something that looks like a dog, because it's helping us provide a balanced menu of options to our guests. Okay, any other questions or comments about Stardog before we keep moving? We're going to come back to it also. Great. So our next section is about designing the menu. And this is both about kind of in the abstract, like what items do we want on the menu, and the more practical matters, like what fonts do we use, or what dishes do we put next to each other? And I want to emphasize that in order to design your menu in a way that's really smart, you have to have the kind of data that Stardog gives you. You have to know what you want to promote in order to make a menu that is designed really well for your business goals. So basically, once we've done the Stardog, we know what dishes we want to sell. How do we make sure that we actually sell them? So this is a list of some tips for printed menus. And my guess would be that most folks here have at least some version of a printed menu. So the first thing we want to do is help customers order our signature and most profitable dishes. A lot of times customers will come in and say, what's popular? Or like, what's the best seller? And this is basically a way of telling them that without them having to ask. So you can give stars prominent positions on the menu, especially towards the top of the menu. You could also put them in a box or use some other verbiage to kind of convey that they are a specialty. So there are a lot of different ways to do that. There's also a huge body of research about where our eyes go when we look at a menu. And you're more than welcome to sort of dive more deeply into that. But generally, customers read starting in the middle, and then they go to the top right and the top left. And so that very top of your menu is pretty valuable real estate. Another tip that I think we want to use within reason, of course, is to provide kind of interesting descriptions for the dishes and the ingredients you're using. So we have a client who serves ice cream, and one of their toppings is blueberries. They have a number of fresh fruit toppings. And because they did the Star Dog analysis, they figured out that the blueberry is a lot cheaper to sell than the strawberry or the mango, both of which were more popular. And so they did an experiment where they took blueberry and retitled it Wild Maine Blueberry, two things that were true. So we weren't asking them to lie, we were just encouraging them to use more descriptive language. And I think we saw the sales of Wild Maine Blueberry go up threefold. So that was a very effective and also like very small tweak. I think certainly you want to be careful that you don't get too wordy on your menus, but just keeping in mind that if there are elements of your dishes that you can highlight, that can be an easy way, again, to kind of get customers' attention. Our next tip is to reduce menu options. And it sounds like we're going to talk to Denise and maybe some other folks about how to go about this in a really intentional way. Ultimately, too many menu items create decision fatigue. And so we want each menu item to be relatively unique in its category. And on some level, I think that when menus are really long, sometimes you feel like, well, I don't know what I want to eat, and the restaurant doesn't know what it wants to serve me. And so we try to keep an eye out for making sure that there aren't repetitive items on a menu, or if two menu items are very similar, how do we make them seem really different and distinctive? So for example, we have a client that serves Thai food, and they have two dishes that are basically pork and rice. And we encourage them to differentiate those two dishes more so that people would not only have a better sense of what they were getting, but also after they ordered it, they would remember which one they got, right? Because if the descriptions are too similar, it's easy to get confused. The last item I have here is to remove dollar signs. This, again, is based on kind of a whole body of research that basically suggests that if there's a number, people understand that that's the price. And the dollar sign only serves to reinforce that you are parting them from their money as they go to pay for their food. Dylan, Carla, anything to add on any of these items?
Yeah, I think there are a lot of ways to reduce the menu size, and I think it's difficult. I mean, it's difficult for a lot of reasons, but one kind of easy one off the top of my head is like, Italian food. You've got like Parmesan and Milanese, and I don't know, you've got piccata or something, and some places will have a chicken version and a veal version of every single one of them. So 4 items actually become 8 because you've got each protein involved. So there are a couple of options. There's one option is just to just pick one protein per style of dish. And that's probably what we'd encourage. But also if you want to have the protein options, having each of those dishes listed individually, and then in the kind of header of the section being your choice of chicken or veal, and next to the veal, there's just like a little plus sign, plus $4 or plus $7 or whatever it needs to be. So that way you're still offering 8 items, but you've presented a much cleaner visual for the guests to make their decision.
One thing I'll also add about pricing within categories is that you want to make sure that the pricing is relatively similar. Of course, things like a steak will be an add-on, like Dylan said, of maybe like $7 or a veal. But you don't want an item that's way cheaper than everything else, because it might encourage folks to just look within a section of entrees, for example, and just pick the cheapest one. But if everything is kind of pooled roughly around the same price point, it makes it easier, or it makes that very expensive item maybe seem worth it relative to the others. So that's something else to consider. But that's kind of separate from doing your COGS analysis and making sure that things are priced correctly. But maybe you're deciding between pricing something 4 times the COGS price versus 5.
And Carla, can you talk a little bit about round number menu prices?
Yes. Generally, when we're also removing those dollar signs, we also want to use round numbers. So for example, if you've got a soda on your menu that's like $2.75, just make it $3. And just make it easier for everybody to read your menu down the line.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I also saw that Vidong says he loves the 95. And so this is another reminder that the way that you design your menu might vary depending on your audience, and you know how much, for example, the aesthetics of the menu matter versus other considerations. And I think, Vidong, you told us when we met last that you're on a college campus or very close to one. And so in that situation, using the 95 might be more advantageous to you. Whereas let's say if we were talking about like a high-end bistro, having 95s on the menu might not make sense for them if their customers are less value conscious or budget focused. And also if they prefer having less busy kind of text or less busy pricing on the menu. So it all depends again on your kind of market and how the concept fits into the way that you want to design your menu. And Denise chimed in here as well. That's great. So it does go back to knowing your audience and knowing your concept.
And also, I think, you know, a lot of this can sound kind of technical and, oh, it requires a lot of research and, you know, some surveying 1,000 people. Like you're a diner too. You dine some places. And so like when you look at a menu, think about your own behavior. Like a really simple one is if an item is priced at $17, people are much more likely to round that in their heads down to 15. If an item is priced at $18, they're very likely to round that in their heads up to 19, or excuse me, up to 20. So there actually might be very little reason to price an item at $18. It might be, you might sell in virtually the same number priced at $19 or $20 because people are already rounding in their heads. And maybe I'm just always sort of thinking about the numbers, but like when I go to an experience, like, you know, go to dine somewhere, if you sort of think about how you're thinking about it, you know, you're probably representative of how a lot of guests are behaving. So just try to look at your menu as if you're a customer. You know, you don't need to rely on fancy data or big surveys to dictate those decisions.
That's great. Thank you, Dylan. And so just transitioning over to a couple of tips for online menus. The first one is pretty obvious, but it bears repeating, which is make it easy for customers to find your menu and place their order using your website, or you know, a link to place their order that's hosted on your website. Number 2 is related to this, which is ensure that third-party sites, so this might be Uber Eats, this might be single platform, ensure that they have your current menu. This is a little bit of a chore because sometimes Google will automatically update the links to our menus. And so we recommend just kind of on a regular basis going through and ensuring that all of your links work and they take you where you want your customers to go. We also really value real pictures of the food. So while there are a lot of stock photos out there in the world, Having great pictures of your food is a really great way to sell. And you'll notice 3C here. If you can't provide pictures of everything, focus on the items that you most want to sell. We also recommend having consistent images. So trying to use similar plating, a similar backdrop or description, or composition, sorry. And then of course, lighting makes a big difference. Many restaurants hire folks to take pictures of their menu items. My opinion is that with a good smartphone and a nice kind of backdrop, it's possible to get photos that are good enough for online ordering without spending too much money. But again, this is part of how we tell the story of what our food is. And certainly, if you have a dish that is maybe less common or not well known to like American diners, having a picture can really help people understand what they're getting and how to navigate your menu. And Christiane asked in the chat, should I be specific about portions on the menu description? For example, should I write the weight of the steak or specify if it's 2 chicken fillets? Christiane, that's a great question. My initial reaction would be not to specify the portion, especially if you have a photo that's accurate. But I would also say maybe if you've gotten feedback from customers that the portion was not what they were expecting, that might be a reason to provide portion information. Another way of thinking about this and kind of expectation setting is like listing an item as an appetizer versus an entree kind of implies the size of the portion. Of course, we know in many cultures, appetizers and entrees are not a thing. And so that can be a challenge, certainly. One thing that I do think can be helpful if you serve any items that are in like individual pieces, so that could be like fritters or dumplings or egg rolls. I do think it's helpful to say how many pieces are included, but I'm not sure that I would do that for like the weight of a steak necessarily. So yeah, I think there would probably be a case by case argument for that, and we'd be happy to discuss that more as well. Dylan, go ahead.
Yeah, I agree with what you said. I think the case with the steak, if you've got several steaks on the menu, then it might make sense to describe the weight or include the weight as well as the cut. But for if you have like one steak on the menu and one chicken dish, totally agree with Irene. I think there's probably not a good reason to put the weight in that case.
Awesome. And so just to kind of put a bow on this, in addition to making more money for your business, a well-designed menu makes decision-making easier for your customers and more streamlined for your back of house operations. This is something that I think is really important. You can turn the tables faster. Your customers have less decision fatigue. They have more confidence that they made a good choice. And so this is something that we really value as we think about how to kind of optimize a business. So we're going to take just a couple minutes to analyze and improve a real menu together. This was a real menu. It's not real anymore, but let's go back to our example of scallion pancake sandwiches at DD Restaurant. So as you can see here, there are 7 sandwiches and they have different descriptions, prices. Some of them have this little leaf next to them, which means they're vegetarian. This one, the 2 leaves means it's vegan. And looking at this menu, we may or may not be able to tell if we think it's any good. It certainly is cohesive, like it's all scallion pancake sandwiches. But with StarDog information, we can actually make a lot of other improvements potentially. So this is the StarDog analysis. And what you can see here is that the double awesome is truly double awesome. It is a star. It sells more than any other menu item and also has the highest contribution. Wow. But we can't all be double awesome. So we have the Porco Rosso also in the star quadrant. And then we do have some question marks, dogs, and one workhorse. So now we'll go back to the menu, and we've added the symbols based on the performance of these dishes. And keep in mind, again, that these classifications are relative to one another, and that they are useful but not absolute. So for example, these are both stars here, but if we go back and look at the chart, clearly the double awesome is outperforming the Porco Rosso. So that's just something to keep in mind. And so our question is, what are some of the things that we could do to this printed menu based on our StarDog analysis? And I am going to just forge ahead and make some suggestions here. But please also be thinking on your own about what changes you might make based on what we're seeing here. How would we sell more workhorses or improve the contribution? How would we sell more of these question marks? And then what do we want to do with these stars that are already performing well? So I'm going to just show a couple of recommendations, and I'll pull them in one by one. Okay, so the first recommendation we have is to improve some wording. So whereas before this was called the shiitake sandwich, we have renamed it to give it a little kind of handle. So it's not descriptive anymore, but we still know that there are roasted mushrooms in it. We also use the adjective char-grilled, taking a page out of the Burger King book, and took out marinated. So there's some little wording tweaks that you can experiment with to see if there are impacts on sales. Improving names, as we said. This is also a new name. It's so striking that I can't remember what it was called before, and I'm not going to go back to the prior slide, but clearly it's memorable. Swapping out ingredients. So for example, this sandwich, the shiitake sandwich, which is now the Elaine, it had sauce gribiche on it. And for anyone who is not a classically trained French chef, I am not one of those, you might not know what this is. And so that could really be putting you off because like it sounds like it could be anything. So we've decided instead to take the pesto that's on this sandwich and put it on this sandwich as well. So we're able to cross-utilize some mise en place. We also raised prices. We raised the price of the beef and broccoli because this was a workhorse, and raising the price $1 is going to help us move it just a little bit closer to being a star. We got rid of the dollar signs, just like we talked about, and we did get rid of one item. One thing that I think Vidang said is, the items that don't sell, you can always run them as specials and kind of bring them back intermittently. And so that's what we could do with the DD special. And then the last thing we did was we centered the stars. So we took the double awesome, we put it in its own box. We said it's our fan favorite. And this is just, a sample of the kinds of changes that you could make based on the information that you get from the StarDog. So if you're doing your costing for your menu, we would recommend doing maybe one menu category, maybe once per quarter. It's okay to make really small changes, and it's also really fun to see the impact of these changes over time. The other thing that I just want to emphasize is that a lot of times when we're thinking about how to improve our COGS, we immediately go to raising menu prices. But there are a lot of different ways that we can influence what people buy and improve our COGS without raising prices. Carla, please go ahead.
One thing I'll add here is that you'll notice that a lot of these changes are very brand aligned. So the menu already had some creative names already. And so having a sandwich named the Veganosaurus Rex, it might like not make sense in your menu particularly, but because this menu already had a lot of personality and kind of some wacky names, that's what works. And same thing with like boxing off the Double Awesome and our fan favorite. It's a more casual concept. And so these specific changes really make sense for the concept. It makes sense for the brand. And so it's really about being creative within the brand that you would like to establish or have established and how these changes might make sense.
Thank you, Carla. That's a great point. As we were talking before about working within your concept and with your concept, not swimming upstream. So these precise changes are not necessarily what we would advise as a blanket improvement to any menu, but in the context of this brand, as far as you can kind of grasp it from this small menu section, these are some of the changes that we would consider. One other thing I want to point out here is that we made all of these changes to hopefully influence customer behavior without asking the kitchen to do anything differently. And if you are a business partner or, you know, the front of house manager and you are constantly having to ask your chef to change things around, that can get hard. And so this is a way that we can start to influence the business's performance without necessarily saying, hey, we need a whole new menu, or like, we need a bunch of new specials. And so you can make these kinds of incremental changes without throwing out all of the good work that your kitchen already does. One last reminder is that the star dog analysis is relative. We create those boundary lines between the categories based on the numbers that we're working with. So it is not going to be possible to have an all-star menu. This is really about making those small incremental improvements. And because of the volume that your restaurants do, those very small improvements can have big impact over time. So we are going to start to wrap up, and then we'll talk a little bit about working more with Prepshift. So to summarize our takeaways, menu costing allows you to ensure that every menu item is a moneymaker, or at the very least, not a money loser. So we want you to be able to confirm that your COGS percentage is healthy, that your menu is priced correctly according to your COGS, that your highest contributors are also your best sellers, that you have a balanced menu mix, so you're not all steak or all chips and salsa, and that your menu is profitable and supports your broader business goals. So we would welcome you to answer any of these questions in the chat. Would love to hear if there was something particularly memorable that we talked about today. If there's something that you're excited to do to make changes to your own menu. And of course, if there are any final questions or concerns. So I'll just leave this slide up for a moment. And at the same time, I'll begin just our brief pitch. We are really excited to be able to do more work with all of you through the City of Lowell. And our partnership is going to allow us to provide technical assistance for selected Lowell businesses that will be funded by the city. So essentially, we can work with you on your finances, on your menu, and the city is here to support that work, which is really exciting. And as a reminder, we work primarily with independent food businesses that have a brick and mortar. This could include full service, fast casual, bakeries and cafes, underrepresented founders such as minority, BIPOC, or women, smaller businesses with fewer than 5 locations, and really at any stage of development. So whether you are a multi-generational family business, or you opened, just a couple years ago, we are excited to work with you. These are some of our clients and partners that we work with, just for reference. And we really draw on our own experience as restaurant workers, managers, and owners, and we try to take a holistic view of your business so that you can make confident and informed decisions as you grow. Clearly, you are here because you have done incredible work in building your business, and we want to support you to get to the next level. We know that for many food entrepreneurs, you have to do a lot of stuff alone, and we want to be here to support you. To be a little bit more specific, we work in a number of areas. So financial administration, which we talked about last week, menu costing and menu design, which we talked about today, as well as business planning and performance management, leadership training. We work not only with owners and managers, but also with restaurant teams. And there are a number of areas where Prepshift doesn't personally work, but we may be able to refer you to other services that may or may not be supported by the city. But if you're ever looking for a referral, we're always happy to talk about that. One of the things we'll start with if we work together is the Prepshift diagnostic, which is basically a big survey where we ask questions about finance, operations, people, and strategy to better understand your business. We provide a health score for the business and try to address strengths and weaknesses and determine what the best next steps are. And actually, I think, Denise, what you said just now really speaks to why the diagnostic has been so valuable to us, which is that you get so busy. You guys are all so busy. And so prioritizing and deciding how to focus and what to focus on can just be really challenging. And so we want to be able to provide a second opinion and maybe identify those areas that really can use your focus and attention. And then the last one I'll just underscore is gain a shared understanding and focus for the next stage of the business. A lot of times in restaurants, we're just trying to keep our heads above water. We may or may not have time to plan and think about not just next week, but next month, next year, next 5 years. And we know that that is a process that is really helpful, but we don't always have time for. So for next steps, you are invited to complete the City of Lowell's TA application, which Allie has put in the chat a few times. And then we can work together to take the Prepshift diagnostic and then work on a project basis on other issues or areas that need attention in your business. And again, what we covered in this workshop and the last one is just a sort of sample of the work that Prepshift does. But we really are grateful for your time, your attention. Thank you, V. So excited to talk to you more. And again, we know that you all work really hard. And so we want to make sure that your hard work is generating all of the benefit that it can. And that you really deserve as entrepreneurs, as small business owners. So I will turn it back over to Allie if there's anything else, but we look forward to keeping in touch and to hopefully working with many of you.
Wow. Thank you so much, Irene, Dylan, and Carla. I had fun. I don't know about everybody else. If anybody wants to ask a question just verbally, let me know. I can unmute you. Yeah, Denise asked if the recording will be available. Yes, we can send it out to everyone who participated, and also we can make it available to folks who couldn't attend today. So if one of your business neighbors wanted to be here and couldn't make it, we can send it out to folks at their request. And yes, fill out the form. You know, we'll try to help as many people as we can. And if there's more people, then I can try and get some more funding to help even more people. We really encourage you. It doesn't hurt to ask. So please fill out the form. If you have questions about it, feel free to reach out to us. We have so many great restaurant owners here. I know you're all so busy and this is a big chunk of your afternoon, and I'm noticing that everyone who joined stayed on. So thank you so much. Yeah, and if folks don't have any questions, we can wrap up, but I'll just give a minute if anyone has something they're typing. Yeah, and I think if you have questions that you want to ask directly to the team, it's possible they can reach out to you afterwards, correct?
Definitely.
Great.
And this is the best email address for us.
Okay, great. All right. Well, I think with that, we will wrap it up. Thank you all so much. And as always, feel free to reach out. Have a nice day.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.